Meeting of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee. We are having another session on our inquiry into renewable energy and net zero, and I'm delighted to be joined by our first panel this morning, all in person. We have David Blevings, the Island Manager of OFTEC. Welcome. We have John Boyce, who's the Wind Development Director of RES. Welcome to you, Mr. Boyce. Mark Fitch, the Corporate Development Director of Transmission Investment. Welcome. And then Paddy Larkin, the CEO of Mutual Energy. Welcome to you all. And if I can start then by asking you a pretty fundamental question. The evidence that we have had thus far suggests that planning policy is, and I quote, disjointed, unsupportive and incoherent, and is a barrier to Northern Ireland's achievement of its net zero targets. And I'm going to ask each one of you, actually, for a very straightforward yes or no answer, first of all, whether you agree with that characterisation. Mr. Blevings?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Boyce?
Yes.
Fitch?
Yes, I think that is right.
Mr. Larkin?
Yeah, I couldn't say anything else. Yeah.
Well, there we are. We have a unanimous jury verdict of yes, and that doesn't come as a surprise to us, by the way, but I think it's very good that we start off with specific answers, and I'm really grateful to you. And now I think, as you've said that in the affirmative, I'd like to know more about what you think are the aspects of the planning regime that make it so ineffective, what needs to change, and what you think good looks like in the planning landscape for energy in Northern Ireland. I'll start with Mr. Blevings.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to be here in the first instance. Planning policy, I personally think it was a good move that it was moved back to district councils, but you have 11 councils, all with elected members, all with vested interests, and again, that slows down the process. And please take us the right way. Civil service, where's the accountability? Where's the fines? Where's the, if policy isn't delivered on time? If in the private sector, if you don't deliver, there's penalties. In the public sector, I don't believe those are there. We need a very fast, streamlined process for energy policy. Now, how that can be delivered with 11 district councils, with 11 individual district chief executives, it's a very difficult one. But if government is serious about speeding up the planning process, we do need something to be interjected into that system to make it work better.
Thank you. Mr. Boyce.
Yep. Again, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today, and really following on from David's comments. We see some of the highest planning fees in Northern Ireland, but we see some of the slowest timeframes in terms of decision making. Since the strategic planning for schemes above 30 megawatts was moved back to central planning in 2015, I believe, there hasn't been any decisions made without going through an appeal system. That in itself tells a story that the policy, is not fit for purpose, not being delivered on the ground. We see delays of sort of 3-4 years there for planning systems. And we also see a really long delay now in the appeal system. So the policy needs to be there to allow decision makers to make those decisions. It needs to be joined up between central planning and the local councils, and we need more resource into those departments to deliver on the timeframes.
Thank you. Mr. Fitch.
I think I'll just add around for our type of project, which is an interconnector, there's the number of bodies that you have to interact with, looking at marine as well as on land. And it's trying to make sure that all those decisions come through in a timely way such that we can progress the project, because small delays in some of these decisions create long additions to programmes for delivery of big infrastructure. For example, a delay to a decision that means we may miss a seabed survey season because it can only be done in good weather. Means we push the whole project back by a year. So there's some amplification of delay that happens that you probably don't realise when the planning and all those consenting bodies act, that then just extends the length of time to deliver infrastructure.
Thank you. Mr. Larkin.
Yeah, we wouldn't have as much involvement as the likes of John or Mark, but I think the key thing is resourcing, that the due process is properly resourced so we get speedy decisions. And the other thing is that we are supposedly a climate emergency. So in an emergency, I don't think planning for renewable generation or on the supply side is really any different from that part of the economy that isn't in an emergency. So we really need to consider whether there is particular standards and that can be applied that can actually allow that aspect of due process to behave as if it's an emergency. I would just on planning, I'd just like to mention one other thing, because the planning tends to focus on the supply side, so generation. I think planning also needs to consider demand, and the demand side, particularly in Northern Ireland, where we're systemically we emit far more CO2 emissions per head of population than GB or anywhere else. And I think on that side of things, planning really needs to start bringing climate action, decarbonisation into decisions. So decisions on where people locate, where services locate, public transport, in terms of the involvement of public transport. So I think that whole aspect of planning is another matter that the eye's off the ball, and there's things being built now that's going to be around for 100 years. So it really needs to be addressed as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Jim Shannon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Gentlemen, you're very welcome, and if you don't mind me, a special welcome to David. Long time no see, David. Your relationship with us in Ards, in the Ards Council area, is one that we've much enjoyed over the years, and your contribution is still there. Over the years, I've been very much keen to pursue the issue of a sea turbine at the Narrows in Strangford Lough when it comes to producing a green energy project that can deliver. I'm long enough and old enough and on the council for a period of time and remember the CGen pilot project that was there at the Narrows between Strangford and Portaferry. The tidal movement there is incredible. Queen's University, I think there's somebody from the second panel from Queen's University here. I've had an engagement with Queen's University Biology Station over the years as well. They've been keen to support us. So I suppose one of the things that the questions in relation to we referred to financial investment in the renewable sector is a barrier. Yeah, but green energy by its very nature, back at the time of CGen and that pilot scheme, the energy couldn't be produced efficiently and cheaply enough, but today it can if that project was in place. My discussions with private enterprise in the past, in the present, would have indicated that there are a number of companies who are interested in investing in these types of projects in Northern Ireland. Some of them are Canadian, some of them are Norwegian, I understand, and there is also a lot of interest from the Republic of Ireland as well. So it seems to me that while the question is lack of financial investment, I'm aware, personally, of at least 3 companies that are very interested, but they don't seem to be going anywhere. Now, we've got a working assembly back in place again. The responsibility falls, I understand, tell me if I'm right or wrong, on the Minister for Deputy, and this one, I think, is where it fell. It used to fall on the shoulder of Gordon Lyons, but he's no longer the Minister for that department. So it seems to me that there is projects possible, that there are companies that are keen to invest, and I'd love to get your opinion, gentlemen, of where you think we can move it forward as well. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Yes.
Well, I'd kick off.
Certainly, you've got lack of investment because of red tape, and again, colleagues will know better than me. It takes too long to get a project from conception to on the ground. Again, I think there's issues over policy about return on that investment, a guaranteed price. But again, I would have limited knowledge in that aspect. But again, that's what I perceive as a barrier.
The contracts for difference scheme we're referring to then when it comes to the contract, because sorry to interrupt, apologies for interrupting you, David, just on that subject matter, as one of my supplementary questions. The present Minister, Andrew Stewart, I think it is, I had him over and this time last year to visit the Portaferry project and get an idea for it, and he told me that if the Northern Ireland Assembly was up in place, that here in Westminster would be keen to work alongside the Assembly in Northern Ireland to make sure projects happen. So if there's a problem with red tape, then the Minister here has committed to perhaps maybe moving those things forward. The Contracts for Difference scheme is a scheme that leads to the net zero targets for the whole of the United Kingdom. It's a really great scheme, and I really can't understand why we can't do better. But now with Assembly back, there's no reason to hold it up anymore. Sorry, I interrupted you, apologies for that there, but just want to get that in.
Anybody else like to comment on that?
Yeah, I can pick up a little bit on that one too. I think we can see 3 barriers to investment, or 3 things that are turning off investors to Northern Ireland at the minute in terms of renewables. There is that red tape, the delay in delivering projects through, any amendments, any changes to those projects being dragged back through that sort of delayed system is turning people off. The lack of a support scheme, so the CFD we've mentioned, which I know is now hopefully in chain with the Assembly back up and running, but for the last number of years we've had a CFD in GB for onshore wind, we've had RESS in the Republic of Ireland, but Northern Ireland has not had either of those, so is sort of handicapped and is obviously dealing in the same market. And then also we're seeing a lot of constraints in the system in Northern Ireland at the minute because we haven't had the investment in transmission upgrades to really get the power flows correct through the country to make sure that the renewable assets can be utilised efficiently.
Yeah, I would support those points. I think, and I think as we discussed in our written evidence, one of the things that secures financial investment and the transmission investment, it works with financial investors to bring the money into the projects, is that you need stability in policy and regulation for these things, and that might be a support scheme for in terms of CFDs and knowing where it's going and being sure that it's stable and predictable. That's very important to get investors to commit to a market. And that's in a sense that the capital is global, so it can go anywhere. The Canadians, as you were mentioning earlier, can go and put their capital anywhere. So unless you present a attractive, stable environment from which they can invest in the long term, these projects take many years to develop. If the policy is moving within that time frame, investors start to feel uncertain and therefore are less willing to invest at the rates that make it competitive. So I think those 2 points are important. And also I think what John said around there being a GB scheme and now a Northern Ireland scheme, I think there's a bit here about how do we bring this together for the benefit of the whole of the UK. As you said, Jim, I think you said, that we're trying to tackle this as the UK. We're making decisions in parts and in isolation, with some boundaries around these decisions that were set up a long time ago when the systems were established, but actually probably don't fit now with trying to get UK net zero with all of the resources we have to the best of our ability. I think is a bit of a mindset shift that we need to think about.
Yeah, just to follow on, the all investments in electricity production now are all underpinned with support schemes. All of them, be it building wires, building power stations, building green generators. We don't have any. In other words, it's as simple as that. So we won't have any investment. Well, sorry, we do. We have a RAB scheme for the network investment, so that will carry on. But until we get a support scheme for, and we have a support scheme for power stations, and power stations are being built at Kilroot. We don't have a support scheme for renewable generation, so there ain't any being built. There is a support scheme in GB. There is a support scheme in the Republic, and people are building there. So it's quite simple. We need a support scheme. Why do you need support? I mean, customers underrate this anyway in the long term, but in terms of how the industry's moved, it's all about infrastructure now. So the developer or a provider puts all their money in on day one and has to recover it over 25 years. It's just too risky to recover that over 25 years for a developer. So a customer smooths it out with a contract for difference. So the contract for difference gives an assured price over that period of time, regardless of where the actual market goes.
Sorry, probably to yourself, Mark, and maybe Paddy as well. I suppose what I get a frustration because we don't seem to be moving it along. The obstacle in the past was a non-functioning assembly, which is a problem to move this project forward. Now we've got that in place. Is it something? What I really would be keen from yourselves is to have an idea of how we get solutions. My whole life, indeed everybody's life as an MP around this table, is to do clearly with solutions. So I have the solutions in my mind, but jumping around and say that of what needs to be done. It would be helpful for us as a committee in this inquiry to have your thoughts of how we progress the project through the Minister's department here at the Assembly, through the Minister here at Westminster. There's no reason, in my humble opinion, Mr. Chairman, for any obstacles to be put in front of anybody now that we have a working assembly to move it along. So with that being the case, your thoughts on how we do that? Will it be... Northern Ireland is the only place in the United Kingdom that has no sea turbine project. I mean, it seems ludicrous that we don't have one when we potentially have one with respect to all other constituencies in Northern Ireland. My one in Strangford has the thing right on their doorstep, so to speak. So just to get the right way to take it forward. So your thoughts on how we move things. And there are companies, by the way, Paddy, you'll know them. I'm not smarter than anybody else around this table. There's companies down south who have some finance to invest, but they also have told us, and I know my colleague Carla and myself had meetings with them, and they are very clear that they need to have some financial incentives to bring the projects along as well. So your thoughts on how that happens, I think that'd be really helpful for us in our inquiry. Thank you.
I mean, there's a few different schemes. I mean, there's CFDs, which is bringing forward renewable energy. There's other schemes here in GB, like cap and floor mechanisms, which have been used to bring forward interconnectors. And there is RAB-based schemes, for example, that's used to bring forward nuclear power. So there's different types of schemes. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, that's for sure. We just basically copy what's done elsewhere, but we take account of what's different in Northern Ireland, I guess. We are a small region. Where you're running auctions, for example, it's fine if you've 20 participants. You get you get good competitive a competitive outcome. But if you run an auction with very little, with one party or whatever, you can get a distorted outcome. So you need to take these things into account going forward. Cap and floor regimes, GB want lots and lots of interconnectors. I think Northern Ireland is too small to want lots and lots of interconnectors. So I don't think one interconnector against another is what you would do. You would do one interconnector against another solution. So there may be 3 or 4 different solutions that might warrant support that you need to go into. So I think generally this problem has been solved by our neighbours. Learn from that and just tweak it to suit what we do in Northern Ireland. But we do need, here in GB there's a low carbon contracts company that acts the counterparty for all this. We don't have that in Northern Ireland, and I don't know whether we can tag on the back of what's done here or not. But there are there's practical things to be resolved to do it, but I don't think it's that difficult,
I think I would agree. I think the more that we can copy what's already being done, tried and tested and mature, and the degree to which it can be dealt with, again, I'd say, can we look to make it a UK-wide scheme? Can we make it apply so we don't have the kind of narrowness of the competition necessarily, but it looks more broadly? I would probably disagree slightly with Paddy in terms of the amount of interconnection that's needed for connecting the SEM market to wider markets. I think work done by the Republic of Ireland Department for Energy, Environment and Communications recently showed that they were looking at needing something like 16 gigawatts of interconnection to support their offshore renewable energy needs. So I think there's probably plenty of opportunity for needing interconnection, and we haven't got the scale that we need to support the decarbonisation of Northern Ireland at all. I think that copy what's there, use those mechanisms right off the back of them seems the obvious thing, because we're trying to solve a UK problem. It's not that the climate targets are Northern Ireland's problem a bit of it and GB's problem a bit of it. We're trying to solve it together. So I would suggest that is tactic in terms of take what's already there, already mature, already understood how it works, and it's gone through the learning process. Just use that.
Thank you very much indeed. Robert Goodwill.
Thank you very much indeed. We're obviously making great progress in decarbonising our electricity system, and the technology that we heard is fairly mature. It just needs rolling out in greater volume. But the majority of homes receive more energy through the gas main or delivered by an oil tanker than through the electricity supply. So if we were to switch from gas to electricity using air source or ground source heat pumps, is that really the solution to the problem? Is there enough capacity in the grid? Are the homes well enough insulated to do that? I think maybe Mr. Fitch would...
I can certainly talk about the capacity on the grid side of things. I would say that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. I think the amount of energy, as you said, Robert, is almost staggering. The amount of energy needed to heat homes and heat water, and therefore the infrastructure that we've built on the electricity side does not meet that. meet that need, and will struggle to meet that need. And so, yes, there is substantial additional infrastructure needed to move the energy from where it's produced, whether it is within Northern Ireland or it's coming from GB. It's got to get to where it's needed, and that's going to need more wires.
I think the figure I saw was that sort of 7 times as much power goes through the gas main as through the electricity wire in a typical house. And even if you insulate the house, that's still going to be a 4 times multiplication. Is that sort of figure one you recognise?
Yes, and it's the peakiness of it as well, in terms of when you need the heat. Everyone needs it at the same time. So you've got very large amount. Not only is the quantum of energy large, but the capacity needed is very high. Unless you can store locally into grids. So yes, the infrastructure is going to be a significant challenge, and that also brings issues for those that deliver that infrastructure. So the Northern Ireland networks, they're relatively small, the scale of investment could be very, very large, and how do they deliver that? How do you help to deliver all of that infrastructure over a relatively short period of time? You're going to need to diversify those that deliver it. It can't just be one party delivering it, because they just won't have the bandwidth and the capacity to deliver it, and potentially there's a resilience question about the programme. Would you ask one person to deliver everything? Well, possibly not. There's a group of people here that are bringing all of their brains to achieve this outcome. So actually bringing more parties into the delivery of infrastructure will be important as well to meet that challenge. When
you say relatively short period of time, I mean, are we looking at a decade or two, or could this be done within the space of a few years, increasing the generation capacity and the distribution capacity?
You're looking at decades for distribution capacity, just because otherwise you're digging up every street in the country to relay the wires.
Okay, Mr. Blevings, I think you wanted to come in.
Simple answer is no. We're not fit for that purpose. And again, we heard about a climate emergency. If we are serious about meeting our carbon budgets, we do need to do something different. The answer to your question is we have 526,000 homes using liquid fuel. It's over 60% of the market in Northern Ireland. It's a good product, but again, we need to decarbonise, and the liquid fuel sector wants to play its role in that. The paper I submitted to this committee shows that we need to use all low carbon and no carbon technologies to meet the budgets.
I think we've got a later question coming up on liquid fuels. So
that's fine. But to answer your question, the answer is no. We would say that we need to look at alternatives to meet those budgets. I'm happy to discuss that.
Okay, and we have a lot of questions, so I think. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sir Robert. Stephen Farry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to our witnesses. Just want to ask you about the issue about the limited grid capacity we have in Northern Ireland, and how much this is going to be a restricting factor in the future in terms of meeting our climate change net zero targets, and what sort of steps do we need to take to improve the grid? We'll start with you, Mr. Larkin, and move along the panel.
Well, we're not in a position where we're applying for grid capacity, but we know, it is very difficult to get grid capacity, both for demand for factories and for supply for generation. It needs to be resolved. There's no way around it. It needs to be resolved. I think it needs to be preemptive, because I think the last question, the answers explained, this is the 10 years, so you need to get ahead of it. So I think all I can say is it's a problem. We need to get ahead of it. It maybe comes back to planning. We talked earlier that if this is a climate emergency, what are we doing to make sure the grid gets there in place quickly? The grid capacity, it needs to be built out for renewable generation, but actually I think in the last inquiry you had NIE and explained that currently we have about 1.9 gigawatts of renewable generation, but as we go forward we're looking to have about 5 gigawatts, but we only have a demand of about 1.5, 2. So all of that extra generation, are we going to build a grid to take it, and move it somewhere, or are we going to put it into hydrogen or store it in some way locally that we don't need that level of grid? So I think there is a problem with the grid build out. We need to get on with it and get it done quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Fitch.
I agree with those points, and I think it's important that, again, we recognise this is not unique to Northern Ireland. It's happening everywhere as the energy transition is happening, and people are coming forward with solutions that could equally apply here in Northern Ireland as they do elsewhere. And again, I think I would just say let's look at our close neighbours and what they're doing, and seek to copy the mature things that are going on there to bring more people in to deliver it more quickly, cheaper, better.
Okay. Mr. Boyce?
Certainly echo all the comments made so far. Maybe the one that I would add is that I think a lot of this starts with a change at the utility regulator level. So we need to see a proper net zero mandate for the utility regulator, so that they are doing anticipatory development and having the grid ready to deliver projects. At the minute, it's very much a bring the projects and then we'll think about the grid. We've got to get out in front of that. We've got to deliver the grid that's there, ready for the projects, and then you've got to bring a mix of technologies to utilise that grid as well as you can, battery storage, green hydrogen, so you really maximise the grid investment that you have.
Blevings?
I've really nothing to add on the technical. Well, I suppose the only thing I would say is cost. We've only 1.9 million customers in Northern Ireland compared to GB 65 million. And I think that is a big issue that the committee has to be wary of, that there's huge cost implications for consumers.
Thank you very much. Are you sure?
Thank you very much indeed. Claire Hannah.
Thank you very much. We were just commenting that unlike politicians, you don't all repeat the good answers. You're very good at just saying he's made the point, whereas we'd want to say it ourselves as well. That we're moving it on nicely. Wanted to talk specifically about wind, and I'll start with you, John. How reliant are we in Northern Ireland on wind to meet our net zero targets, and what challenges does that pose for security of supply throughout our transition?
So it's undoubtedly the best resource that we have in Northern Ireland, so it will always play the most major part in the energy mix, but it has to be an energy mix. There has to be other technologies in there, and I touched a little bit about how we can better store and utilise those, through battery storage schemes, through green hydrogen, where we can convert that renewable electricity into hydrogen, and then it becomes very dispatchable and storable. So it will play a major part in that, as it should, as the best resource, but it has to be part of a balanced mix to make sure we kind of maximise the system.
Okay. Are there challenges for, I suppose, this concept? I think one of our witnesses had talked about, we're double running. We're trying to bring all this new energy on stream while maintaining the security supply. How are we doing on that?
I would say we're struggling a little bit on that, and we're struggling because of the points I've made around that anticipatory development in grids. So we see a lot of constraints in Northern Ireland at the minute, and quite crudely that's caused by a lot of flows coming from GB across the Moyle interconnector. We've taken Kilroot offline, so there's a lot of flow line coming from Kilkira in the northwest, which is where there's a concentration of renewables. So you're really trying to take a lot of that demand, a lot of that supply through the same lines. So, a more anticipatory development of grid to kind of counteract that and make sure that we get the right energy to the right places at the right time is absolutely essential for Northern Ireland.
You think that's anticipatory, i.e. the grid, rather than being kind of responsive to development applications? Okay. What about offshore wind? How are we doing with that, and how important a part of could it be? I mean, what opportunities, I suppose, exist for it to make that part of our mix?
I'm not as well qualified to speak on offshore. We don't operate in that part of the industry. Again, I would say at a high level, it will definitely play a part. It's a longer term investment, and in reality, it won't play a part to our 2030 targets. May play a part to our longer term net zero targets, and will definitely play a part in that energy mix. But in the short term, we have onshore wind schemes and solar projects, battery storage projects in the planning system ready to be delivered. We need to concentrate and focus on the kind of task at hand.
I think we did hear from witnesses that without it, we weren't going to be able to make those numbers. But we're playing with what's in front of us. Does anybody else want to add anything to that? Yes, please, Paddy.
Yeah, I think just in terms of renewables, I think we have to make the most of what we have, and we have lots of wind. And we also have lots of agriculture. So wind power and biomethane production are things we can do and do well, so we need to get on with it and get them done. But both of those bring security supply issues. Biomethane not as bad because it's quite easily stored, but wind it's a unpredictable intermittent resource. So to actually have security supply, you need to make that dispatchable. You need to be able to turn it up and down and use it whenever you need to use it. And to bring that in, it needs a mix of technologies. Interconnection is one, where if your neighbours needs it and can supply you whenever they don't need it, then that's great. But our neighbours are fairly well focused on wind as well. So you're into storage then. And storage, I think, is really, really important. Even for 2030, we'll see lots of curtailment in wind because we can't store it and bring it back. And also we're getting less value out of the wind we're building because we can't use it as much. So we need to bring storage in, short, medium, long-term storage. Batteries play a part, but it's tiny in comparison to the amount we need. Our own estimates look at just to decarbonise the electricity network, we need about 600 gigawatt hours of storage. Turlock Hill, the only pump storage scheme on the island, is 3. So it gives you an idea of what we need. We're not going to do it with the likes of batteries or pump storage, although we need as much of that as we can. We're going to need, chemical storage, and that's probably in the form of hydrogen. And we're actually well placed for hydrogen. We can produce lots of wind. We also have the salt at Isle McGee, which is a fantastic resource that, for example, in the south doesn't have that at all, and they're really struggling. How are we going to store chemical energy? They're going to have to turn into liquid fuels. So we are well placed to do that. So there are things we can do there. But I think coming back to your question about offshore wind, and I think the answer is this energy transition is a big change. We need big projects, transformative projects, and I think offshore wind is needed, but it is transformative. It is 10 years down the line. It's transformative. I think it's probably going to be floating turbines for us, but it will give us a step change to actually really get there. But there's other projects for example, storage that are needed as well to make that transformation. We need to get, use of that salt strata to store both biomethane. It's a lot easier stored and used, and also to store hydrogen whenever we produce it. And then that hydrogen can be used in, to produce e-fuels or liquid fuels, whatever. We've just got some funding in a consortium to actually look at that for marine, for the vessel, the marine boats coming out of roll-on, roll-off ferries in Larkin, to look at a study for producing hydrogen and then making that into e-fuels.
Were you wanting to come in, Mark?
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that. I think that all those things are going to be great in the mix in time. I think the key for me is that this security supply question is not a unique question, and every other market is saying we need to interconnect more with our neighbours and integrate more broadly to bring that diversity of generation now. And so I would definitely say that interconnection has got to be part of that solution. And it's an obvious part of that solution, given again what we talked about earlier about the scale of this problem. This is gigawatt scale of what we need to achieve here, and some of these technologies are yet to come into commercial that will solve the problem, and elements of the problem are yet to come into commercial reality. Also need regulatory support to get them there or to mature them, I would suggest that interconnection is that ready-to-go technology that we can bring now to start building and address that security supply problem as most of the rest of Europe and the world is looking at. And when you actually look at the actual correlations between wind in Northern Ireland and wind in GB, it's not fully correlated. There is, as in wind fronts go through and Northern Ireland get the wind first and then Scotland gets the wind, so you get this nice slosh of wind back. So there's an element of it's sort of mutually beneficial, and how the energy can slosh between the two markets is part of the thing if you've got the capacity between the two, because weather moves across.
There's a joke in there, I just can't find it, but
sloshing wind.
Yes.
Well, surely it should be sloshing tidal, shouldn't it?
It should be, shouldn't it, really? The whooshing wind. Anyway, we'll perhaps stop.
Thank you. Unless David, no, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Kelly Tolhurst.
Thank you for being here. We sort of skirted on it a bit earlier, but really just want to sort of hear from you about how what extent the government-backed renewable support schemes are necessary for Northern Ireland to achieve and the net zero target. So has the lack of government-backed renewable support schemes affected your organisation's ability to work towards those targets? And also, I mean, we've had a number of schemes proposed to us, but what do you believe would look like best practice in terms of developing those support schemes? Anyone?
I can take that one if you like. So yeah, it's absolutely essential. We talked about the investment, and that investment is a global commodity. And when we see a support scheme in GB through the CFD, and we see a support scheme in ROI, and we've got Northern Ireland in the middle. Without that, the investment just goes either side. That's pretty plain to see, and the stats completely support that. Since the removal of NIRO in 2016-2017, the levels of renewables delivered in Northern Ireland has just dropped off the scale. Maybe one point just to note on that, when we talk about the CFD scheme, where we saw really high energy prices a few years back, those CFD schemes in GB paid back hundreds of millions to the government. So we shouldn't think about this as a really subsidised thing. Yeah. It's a support mechanism. It provides that kind of floor to the price to attract investment in. But if we compare the levels of those CFDs against any other energy supply, whether it be from natural gas or from coal or whatever, from fossil fuels, it's still massively cheap. It's great. Provides great value for the Northern Ireland consumer.
Anyone?
I think just carbon and the cost of carbon isn't reflected in electricity or heating prices. It's just not properly reflected. Fossil fuels took 60 million years with all the creatures that had to live and die and be crushed, and the price of that just is not reflected in carbon fuels. So renewable electricity is much cheaper if it was properly reflected, but it's not properly reflected, and it's difficult to properly reflected because you have of the affordability issues and everything else. So in that circumstance, you need a support scheme to allow renewables to come on and compete. And it's not necessarily about cost. I think that's the point John's making. It's about risk. So over the life of the asset, it will perform well, and it will produce what it's supposed to do, and it will be good value for customers. But there's a chance it might not be. And a developer coming along and say, well, I'm not going to take that chance because it's just too risky for me taking that chance on that one project. But for customers as a whole, taking a risk on all the projects smooths all that out. And typically, it doesn't cost over time. We run the Moyle interconnector, and it's underpinned with a support scheme from customers. But over time, and at times customers had to pay money for it, but over the long term, it doesn't cost customers anything in terms we pay money back to customers with it. So I think the support schemes are absolutely needed to remove risk from developers, to compete with our neighbours in terms of attracting finance and capital into the country. You need to have the similar support scheme to your neighbours. But it doesn't necessarily cost customers over the long term. It has a smoothing effect.
Anyone? David? Mark?
Nothing more to add.
Yeah. That's great. So do you see then the biggest benefit? What would be the biggest benefit for organisations would just to be that one point, being able to develop schemes that just de-risk it? So that would that necessarily, do you think, sort of charge an increase immediately in investment if there were those schemes available? Just that de-risking element.
I think so. There's the planning issue that you have to be able to build it. But I think in terms,
everywhere, not just in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, but I think in terms of if a support scheme was in place and an auction was held, or some form of competition was held, open season for people to bring forward, I think John will probably be able to answer it better. But definitely, the projects come forward.
Yeah, no, undoubtedly. I think even RNI have some really key stats on that. They did some surveys with investors. And I think very, very crudely speaking, are you willing to invest in Northern Ireland renewables as of today without a support scheme? 20% yes, 80% no. Would you be willing to invest if a proper support scheme similar to CFD or RASS was available? 80-90% yes. Just completely inverted the stats. So in terms of one thing that we could do really quickly, which would have a really large effect, I think the introduction of a proper support scheme is undoubtedly it. Other things that we talk about around improving of the planning system and building out transmission lines, they are longer term deals. They require a lot of resource, a lot of planning, and will take time to filter through. That support scheme is a really quick fix.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carla Locker.
Thank you, and thank you to the panel for your engagement so far. Just want to talk a little bit about interconnection and the importance of it for achieving net zero. So probably Mark and Paddy on this one. So just how important do you actually think interconnection is for achieving net zero? And then we'll maybe just walk through a few things on that particular issue.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. I think it's absolutely essential. I don't think any market is going to achieve their net zero targets without it, because it lowers the cost of achieving net zero, because you share capacity and you share security supply resources between markets. And I would broaden that point to the wider infrastructure as well, that it's not just interconnection. Interconnection is one part of it. That helps you share with your neighbours, but you need to share all resources across the market that you're in. So it needs to be internal infrastructure as well that needs to be developed. But I would say that interconnection provides a way to maximise the revenue of your renewable resources, because they can export their excess when it's available, if it's not being absorbed by storage or hydrogen production. It allows you to import power when you need it, when you've got a shortfall, enhancing security of supply, and provides the flexibility system operator needs in order to try to avoid curtailment of wind through a day. And I think, again, back to the point on scale, our project is looking to be 700 megawatts, but as I said earlier, the need identified by the Republic for the SEM market is more like 16 or 17 gigawatts. So, multiple times what we're proposing here, in order to allow the renewables to be exported and used in the right way. So, for me, interconnection is entirely essential to achieving the net zero aims.
And would you say that so the Republic of Ireland would be much better sort of prepared? I know they have an interconnection policy. Do you think the Northern Ireland Assembly should work at pace on something of that nature to try and ensure that it gives you guys a framework to...
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is we need to get on with what everyone's doing now. We can't stop and wait for a perfect policy to be developed. I think there are things, there are no regret investments that can be made now into interconnection. And then, but we do need that interconnection policy to understand the broadest need over the long term for what needs to be developed for the best interest of Northern Ireland and the UK more generally. That the thing that I think is one of the difficulties in developing interconnection is that it always looks better from one end or the other. Decision, or the Minded 2 decision that came out from Ofgem last week on our project says, well, it's not so much of interest to GB consumers and therefore we're not willing to support it. But from a UK perspective, it's absolutely essential. So we've got these kind of artificial boundaries of decision making that are there for history that we probably need to look at to make sure that the UK is using all of its resources to the maximum possible, and putting the infrastructure between the parts of the UK therefore is very important, whether that's between GB and Northern Ireland, whether it's between Scotland and England, or Wales and England, Wales and Northern Ireland. All those things are all essential, whether they're termed interconnector or whether they're termed infrastructure. They're all doing the same job. They're making sure the energy surpluses can be taken to where the energy is needed. And that, for me, is part of solving the net zero problem.
And you're obviously sitting in the UK Parliament. You have the ear of government. What more do you think the UK government I'm sure they're all listening in. Intently. What more could this government do to help with interconnection and making sure that Northern Ireland is ahead of the curve on this?
Yeah, I think we need a way of making better decisions and looking at those decisions between how the utility regulator looks from Northern Ireland to GB and how Ofgem looks from GB to Northern Ireland, and go, let's come together and find out what's the best for UK. Otherwise, we're at risk of achieving net zero for UK, but doing it in a way that sort of advantages or disadvantages one or the other bits of the UK, whether it's Northern Ireland or East Anglia. Somebody's potentially going to not get the benefit. So that kind of forum to allow regulators to make decisions sensibly for the UK when they're sort of the rules of their game are you're the GB regulator, you're the Northern Ireland regulator. There's another layer here that goes, well, actually we're all trying to get to UK net zero climate change targets, so why are we not making decisions that are best for that? And clearly there's the steps that have been made, and I think somebody referenced it for UR as well, that Ofgem now has a net zero objective, and that's been changed recently in the Energy Act, and that's about UK climate change targets. Has it making its decisions with that in mind and the best interests of the UK climate change targets? That's the real question I think we need to get at, and how can it make those best decisions, which might need something, the government to allow them to make those sort of broader decisions about how it's best for the UK, rather than having to stick within almost their lane as history has set out for them.
That's very helpful, and very helpful for our end report in terms of that better connection even with the regulators. So thank you. Anyone else?
I couldn't agree more with what Mark's saying there about in terms of working together regionally, both on electricity and gas. When we were in the EU, there was a project of common interest which looked at a project in one area actually advantaged another area, and they were supported by the EU. And we had a number of projects had project common interest status. That's fallen away now, but we need to keep the cooperation and keep working across the regions to make sure it works. In terms of coming back to your question about interconnection, we run the Moyle interconnector, 500 megawatts each way to Scotland, and it is crucial. It's used day and daily. If the wind's not blowing so much, we're important. If the wind picks up at all, we're either exporting or the wind's turned off. It's simple as that. If we're not available, it's turned off. We've worked hard over the last few years to get the capacity of that up in the Scotland area. So interconnection is essential. It's a big part of, as I was saying earlier, that Northern Ireland demand is averages about 900 megawatts. Our interconnection is 500. It's a big part of it. So there is, putting any scheme on in Northern Ireland makes a big change. You need to get it right. It's different from here in GB. There's 60,000 megawatts is what you're into. You put a 1 megawatt interconnector on, it doesn't make that much big difference. At home it makes a big difference, so you need to make sure you get it right. And you also have to think about diversification and not putting all your eggs in one basket, and whether there's diminishing returns the more you put of one particular thing. Even wind energy, the more you put on a wind energy, the more it's going to be curtailed at the minute, unless you have interconnection or storage or whatever else. So all those things have to come together at the same time to make sure we get the best use out of the infrastructure we are building.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Robert Goodwill, again.
Thank you. Mr. Blevings, we've already heard that Northern Ireland is much more dependent on liquid heating oil than other parts of the UK and other parts of the world, for that matter. And obviously, we're sort of used to putting E10 petrol in our cars or B5 diesel, which is just basic biofuel. But what is the potential for using much higher levels of naturally agricultural oils in this way? I mean, is it really potential? And is there enough oil in the world derived from oilseed rape or palm oil or wherever it might come from to actually make that switch?
We don't talk about palm oil. That's a no-no. That's a big no-no. But to answer your question, I welcome the question, and I'm delighted to hear Paddy talk about diversification, because we've talked a lot about electricity generation, we've talked about decades, we've talked about grid upgrades. We're forgetting about the consumer, and we're forgetting about the carbon budget. We need to act before 2030. Your question is well timed, and I thank you for it. In our paper we submitted, we do believe there is a solution that will reduce the demand on the increased electricity generation requirement. You made the point about transport fuels. That has been working extremely well since 2008 and is responsible for a third of the transport reductions in carbon emissions. We think that should be replicated into the renewable liquid fuel heating obligation. And again, if you remember last year, the Right Honourable George Eustace put forward an amendment to the Energy Act 2023, and there will be a consultation, I believe, this summer on a renewable liquid fuel heating obligation. Again, in the paper we have submitted, we have said that we can introduce a blend to the current liquid fuel heating. Cost to consumer would be less than 2 pence per litre. Again, if the renewable heating fuel obligation...
What percentage inclusion are you looking at?
We can introduce a 20% blend from 1st of April 2025, which will mean that the UK meets its carbon 4 and 5 budget for off-grid homes. Again, cost to consumer, approximately 2 pence per litre. We think it's an excellent opportunity. We'd like the certificates to be traded between RTFO and RLFHO, and again, there's no reason why that couldn't be introduced very, very quickly.
Mm. Obviously, you will require a lot of vegetable oil to do that, and the UK rape acreage is down 60% because of pest disease problems. Will we have to import a lot more triglyceride?
It is imported, and I will submit this paper later to the committee. We commissioned a report by Portland Analytics using data from the Imperial College London and using data from the US Energy Centre, which again concludes that there is more than enough feedstock to supply the UK and Ireland heating requirements using biofuel. In this instance, hydro-treated vegetable oil, HVO, is the one we're currently working with. We already have co-processing in Teesside and Humber. We have 2 companies in Northern Ireland talking to Invest Northern Ireland about producing it locally in the northwest, Derry/Londonderry for the audience. We do believe there is a real potential. And again, we think about the consumer. You look at the business upgrade scheme we have in GB, you look at the problems they are having with retrofits. We talk a lot about the supply side, electricity generation, but we have to think of the consumer. The average cost to install a heat pump and a retrofit is £24,000. And again, I don't need to tell the members around this table, people in Northern Ireland, they don't have that sort of disposable income. The recent Money Week, January 2024, said 35% of UK people had less than £1,000 in savings. Was it 63% or something said they couldn't last more than 3 months?
You're saying you can buy a lot of oil at 2 pence a litre more for £20,000?
We think it's an easier solution. We would advocate that there is no panacea for decarbonisation. Putting all your eggs in one basket for electricity is not a sensible option.
Would that need a subsidy to make it sort of...
No, it'll cost government nothing. The RTFO costs government nothing.
You'd have to bring legislation to compel, would you?
It's an order, as I understand it, the energy order, and I'll look to Jim to back me up here or help me out, that there's a consultation on a renewable liquid fuel heating obligation coming from George Eustace's amendment last year, and my understanding is if that is agreed and government put it in place, they would order similar to the RTFO, the Renewable Transport Fuel Order, and again, industry would then deliver that on behalf of the government.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Claire Hannah.
Thank you very much. I wanted to talk about the potential of mutualisation of assets. Obviously, Paddy, you raised that in your written evidence to us. Could you just outline what you think the benefits would be, and I suppose any initial costs and risks that you...
I mean, we're a mutual company, so we don't have any shareholders. All of our assets have been financed with debt, 100% debt, and we've had supportive licences from the regulator to allow that to happen. So there is a risk transfer to customers, a bit like what we were talking about earlier. There's a risk transfer on CFDs or grid development. We're unique, I guess, in the UK in terms of Northern Ireland's the only place that has energy companies that are mutual. we believe it is a really useful.
We're the only region that has.
We're the only region that has mutual companies providing
multiple
energy infrastructure.
Yeah, and multiple mutual companies.
Well, they're all within our group, yes, but we work across both electricity and gas. And I think coming into the energy transition, because we don't have any shareholders, we don't have, I guess, that vested interest. I mean, there's other things we don't have that vested interest, so we can. Comment on things like that. We also work across electricity and gas, so we own the Moyle interconnector, we own the gas links to Scotland, and the gas to the West pipeline. So we don't have a vested interest in terms of heat pumps or gas or what have you. We work across both. I think it has performed well in Northern Ireland. We've returned over £200 million to customers, basically. In comparison to if you required to give a return, it's typically about 2%. The cost of debt compared with the cost of an equity debt mix is typically about 2% better on infrastructure costs. And for long life, strategic assets are really important. So not assets that are changing all the time. So assets that you have to invest. So the interconnector. We spent £130 million building it, and it's there for 30 years. The gas pipelines, £100 million each, and they're there for 30 years without a lot of more investment needed. It really fits the bill, but it's horses for courses, so I wouldn't advise it for everything. But it certainly provides an option for infrastructure ownership, and it's also, particularly for strategic ownership, where government want to have a bit more control, or customers want a bit more control or ownership. The other thing is it does return, but I guess the risk on so offshore wind here, or indeed wind turbines, customers underwrite it, but at the end of the term it goes back to the developer, and the power station in Northern Ireland being an example. Whereas the mutualised assets at the end of the term, whenever the debt's repaid, it belongs to the customers. It belongs to society, and they can use it. They get any further value, any residual value is all used for customers. So we believe there is a role for mutualisation going forward. What we need in the energy transition is high cost, long life, strategic infrastructure, where the cost for customers of paying for that infrastructure is the cost of financing, primarily the cost of financing it. And if we have a way to bring assets forward where the cost of financing can be lowered, then that's a lower cost for customers. It doesn't work for all assets, but it certainly works for the ones that we've been involved in so far, and we believe there's others going forward where it could be applied.
Very compelling, and again, just on something somebody said in one of the early, that at the moment it is all on the consumer, so it might as well be invested in a more sustainable and retainable way. Mark, would you have any thoughts or response on that?
Yeah, and I think, as Paddy said, it's horses for courses, because what effectively mutualisation does is consumers are the equity party. They provide, if anything goes wrong, they fund that, and they get the return. As Paddy said, the 200 million has been returned. So consumers are the equity owners in that post, and they take all of the ups and downs. And I think that's great where you've got an established asset that's mature and built. I don't know whether consumers will be willing to take all of the construction risk, the development risk, delay risk when you're developing new assets, because that's a much different kind of risk profile than buying a ready-made asset that is already operating and already known. So a bit like transmission investment does another thing, which is we own offshore transmission in GB. We manage that, but they're already built, and therefore when they're acquired, the cost of capital, the amount that we have to pay for financing, is very, very low because they're known, they're low risk. If you're developing an interconnector, you have to go through a development stage where lots of decisions by government bodies and authorities and planning are unknown at the start, and that means you take a lot of risk. And that's possibly not a risk that should be borne by consumers if, for example, in a cap and floor or other regime that's available, that is held by the equity holder, and the equity holder takes that risk and doesn't expose the consumer to that risk. So if an interconnector is late, consumer doesn't pay. If construction goes over the cost, consumer doesn't pay. If something fails in the future on a cap and floor interconnector, the consumer doesn't pay. They're immune from the cost. They just protect the interconnector from market fluctuations. So they're exposed to the risk of the market not delivering, but not to the cost of the interconnector's operations. And that's quite an important distinction about what risks the consumers are taking, because the cap and floor shares the market risk, but the equity holder takes all the cost risk and the future refurbishment risk and all those kind of things over the 25-year life of the interconnector sort of plan. But it's and the reason that the market risk is shared is because obviously what flows over the interconnector is dependent on energy policy on both ends of the interconnector, and therefore is sort of outside of what their control is, but they're completely on the hook for things they control, which is the design, the operation of the interconnector. So I think there's there's horses for courses, but it's possibly not in where you're developing and constructing new assets. Is probably not mutualisation is not necessarily an ideal model for that, because there's no incentive to manage the equity risk, because the consumer doesn't have any control at that point.
I might just, did you want to?
Only just, it is, mutualisation is a risk transfer to customers, no doubt about it. Customers are taking that risk, and they also get the upside. I guess most of the assets are the assets that we own and operate, and the assets that we think is applicable for. Customers implicitly take the risk anyway. So, for example, you have to think particular assets that will be owned by a private company. Would customers accept those assets just fall in a heap and they wouldn't come back to fix them? So, if you're implicitly underwriting them, then by putting it explicit, you can get an advantage for something that you're underwriting anyway. I think Mark's a good point in terms of the development and construction risk. That is much more difficult to manage, and there's a premium needed for that. Now, it's not impossible. We've just built the Gas to the West pipeline. We took it right through from development, construction, and built it. But the construction and development risk, we did it with a partner, and the partner took risk on that, and they took a premium on it, and they took a return on that. But that's a few years to get it built. Yeah. It's going to operate now for 40, 50 years. During that 40, 50 years, there isn't that risk, so it can be mutualised and can return that way. So it is possible to do. It's not as straightforward as an existing functional asset.
Thanks a million. I'm sure we'll delve into it in our report. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Stephen Farry.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. In our written evidence, we have received some calls for the creation of an independent energy commissioner with statutory powers to hold the Northern Executive accountable for its energy commitments, to provide a clear pathway for energy strategy. Do you think this is a necessary component in terms of the overall approach to net zero? And perhaps if we added or asked the question in a different way as well. I'm conscious that there's a wealth of different organisations and structures out there that are all part of the pitch in dealing with renewable energy. Do you think there's a way in which that could be better streamlined or rationalised and to make the system work more easily, and up to and including the fact that we have, shall we say, one department with lead responsibility for energy in the form of economy, but other departments have factors to play in terms of how that works and whether it could be better consolidated perhaps under one department or better joined at working between the different structures. So start with David this time and move that way along the table.
Sure. Again, Stephen, to answer your question, I suppose it depends on the defined role and what power they would be given. I would agree with you. If you look at the players, ESB, Sony, utility regulator, the oil industry, the gas industry, there's a plethora. You take the layers of government we have, the different departments, the different responsibilities, from DERA to the Department of Economy. There is, in my humble opinion, looking from the outside, there doesn't seem to be very good joined-up thinking. Again, if an independent could come in and pull those people together and give direction and have authority to make decisions, I would certainly be an advocate for that. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'd echo all of that. It really is. It's so important to have something. We've talked a lot about energy mix, and we've talked about the different technologies and the planning and the transmission lines. You have to have somebody there who's going to pull all those strings together, focused on net zero. There has to be an accelerating renewables task force, net zero task force, whatever you want to call it. So, and as David says, somebody with proper decision making and a proper mandate to really deliver change here, but absolutely essential.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I was just forming a thought. It's the again. I'd reflect the experience in Great Britain where they're establishing the NESO, the National Energy System Operator, which has started to bring together electricity and gas, and probably hydrogen, and deals with storage, and probably will look at where strategic investments in interconnection might be needed. So it's doing part of that. I don't think it's fully answering the net zero question. Yeah. And then I think it comes back to the point that I raised earlier in terms of how do we solve this best for the UK, and whether that commissioner needs to be looking at how we do it more broadly. If you have another body that's trying to optimise for Northern Ireland, and you've got a body that's also optimising for Scotland, and another body that's optimising for Wales, and a body that's optimising for England, how do we solve that for the UK? Where does that maximising all of our resources come together? And I think the key thing for success of a commissioner, whatever level they're at, is the need to have access to the capability. Yeah. And we can see that at the formation of the NESO in GB. They're very clear that they haven't got all of the capabilities they need to be able to make those strategic decisions on what's best to invest more in or less in.
Paddy?
I think if it speeds up infrastructure delivery, helps to integrate the energy industry, all the various players, for example, system planning on electricity, system planning on gas, they work together, heat provision, and provides reassurance to the public that the industry is doing the right thing in the right ways. I think it will be a good thing.
Thank you. And then just to sum up, and again, requiring a succinct answer, what specific actions would each of you want from UK Government, Executive and Northern Ireland Assembly? Is there specific requests that you would have that you think will make a difference?
I'll reiterate the same point. I think that we need some way of bringing together the key decision makers across the nations to a UK solving the climate change problem, looking at all of the infrastructure that we need to make that happen, and the support schemes, so that we don't get competition between nations of historical boundaries that were set up with good intentions when they were set. Do they apply now when we're trying to solve a much broader, bigger problem, not only in the UK but with our neighbours as well?
Thank you.
I'd like to see the UK government put out the renewable liquid fuel heating obligation consultation before the summer. That would be a real plus for our industry.
Thank you, David. John?
Probably just reiterate three earlier points. Really, it's joined up planning system, anticipatory investment in grid, and a renewable support scheme to help deliver those projects.
Thank you.
I think the government need to bring forward the climate action plan that will meet our targets. That will drive a lot of things, but even in anticipation of that, we need to get renewable support schemes in place and consider storage, because the curtailment is going to be a big issue.
Well, thank you very much indeed for those succinct and clear answers, gentlemen, and for being a very helpful panel this morning. I'm grateful to you all. I'm going to now invite the second panel to take your place. So I'll allow you to leave with our thanks and good wishes.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Fresh, Robert.
Shoots your face. Like a handheld thing,
Clearly, we
just like a. They bought a new phone and they can't get it.
We like to repeat everything, but they don't.
Painful.
Oh, we get more evidence.
Oh, absolutely.
Really good.
Yeah, and I'll sort it out.
Yeah. We've got ideas. We'll do a follow-up, or they'll do a follow-up with us, won't they? Their ideas.
I can't even plug us on. I need to get it to work.
Right, I agree.
Teenager in the office.
They are. They're sort of 21-year-old.
Right, okay.
About as much use as.
I just need to start with you,
Whatever you want to call it.
Points coming through, bullet points, which we can then extrapolate, I think.
Just find it sort of quite painful.
Annoying.
Morning Business Integrated School, Hazelwood College.
Be faulty, of course.
So
Thank you. Order.
You won't be faulty.
Order.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to the second panel for being here. They're both an in-person panel. We're joined by Professor David Rooney from Queen's University Belfast. Welcome, Professor. And James Richardson, Chief Economist at the UK Climate Change Committee. A warm welcome to you both. And I'm going to start off with the same short question that I asked the previous panel that you might have heard. The evidence that we had is that the planning regime is disjointed, unsupportive and incoherent and is a barrier to NI's achievement of its net zero target. Would you agree with that characterisation? I'll start with Professor Rooney.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Richardson.
So, planning is a general concern across many jurisdictions, and it's clearly an issue in Northern Ireland as well.
And in particular, I think just looking then at what the specific barriers are in Northern Ireland, and then being more positive, what would effective look like? And if I start with Professor Rooney again.
So the issues with planning is, as has been pointed out by many people so far, relates to the speed of decision making and just getting projects effectively started, just getting those consents effectively to start projects and get them running.
Thank you. Mr. Richardson.
Yeah, again, speed is clearly the issue. I think you can help that by having a clear political statement on the kind of overriding public interest in renewable energy in Northern Ireland, so that planners know which direction they're pointed in. You then, you need simpler issues like resources in the system to make sure that everybody can meet. The timetables that are set out in the system are quite rapid, but they're not being met. So if you can get things to hit those targets, then you can make decisions more quickly. And there are other things that you can do, for example, environmental data, rather than waiting for a planning submission to come in and then collecting data, which can be time consuming. You can collect that data up front if you know the kinds of areas that you're going to be investing in. So there are things you can do in parallel that would accelerate the whole process.
Very much. Jim Shannon.
Sure, thank you, and gentlemen, nice to see you as well. Thanks for coming along. The themes and the pointers and the focus will have come from the previous panel, because we've already seen what their thoughts are, and I think many of us here in the panel and the committee would subscribe to those. Unfortunately, the lack, and it's been outlined by the previous panel, the lack of financial investment in Northern Ireland's renewable sector is a very clear current barrier to moving forward. So perhaps maybe from your point of view you could outline the conditions that would be necessary to be in place so that Northern Ireland's renewable sector can attract more investment. More investment, it's so simple logically to look at it, but tell us what your thoughts are to make that happen, please. Thank you.
So again, yes. The issues when you speak to the planners or the people who are trying to deploy projects, it does come down to planning, plus also then the mechanisms in order which to support projects in order to be able to then provide that low risk certainty of an income, and just to guarantee that those projects will be successful over the longer term. So planning has been an issue, regulation has been an issue, connection charges have been issues, and then support mechanisms have been issues. I think these have been highlighted by others that have spoken.
Yes, I'm at risk of repeating everything. I think that definitely those support mechanisms that we see in both the UK and the Republic, they're absolutely essential for a technology with the economics of wind, essentially. They're not subsidies, but they are about getting the right market structure in place. Planning we've talked about. The other big thing is then grid connections and the ability to make anticipatory investment in the grid so that that can happen in the same time that you're building, rather than everything waiting on everything else.
Ultimately, is it the Northern Ireland Assembly reinvigorated, renewed, a new minister in place? Is it the responsibility of that minister to move it forward? Ever mindful that all our panel members have said, and I agree with them, and I think probably we all agree with them, that there's a necessity for the drive to come from here at Westminster and to work with all of the regions. So who makes it happen? We all know what needs to be done. That's a fact. You know, I know, everybody in this room knows, and indeed I suspect Uncle Tom Cobley knows as well. The fact of the matter is, who moves it forward? It's about making it happen. So I'm really, really keen to get your thoughts on which backside do we kick hardest to make it happen.
I think it is about moving all the players forward together. So I think the Northern Ireland Executive has the key convening role to bring things together. I think the point was made to you earlier that in Great Britain, Ofgem, the regulator, has a net zero
objective. That isn't true for the utility regulator. So that's something that would be worth looking at to ensure the utility regulator has a clear net zero objective. You've got the system operator. It's not quite got the same powers as the system operator here, but it does have that kind of key spatial planning role that is being developed in Great Britain. And you've got, the people who do the planning decisions. You need to get all of these people moving forward. And then there are issues coordinating with the UK government. Again, you heard about interconnectors, for example, and also with the Republic, because it's a single electricity market, so it's important to kind of coordinate all those things. But yeah, the players are in place. Mostly, as you say, they know what needs to be done. Clearly, it's a matter for the executive and the assembly to put a support system into place, but a lot of the rest of it is about just moving everything forward as fast as possible.
And what you're saying, will that be enough to ensure that the private investment actually happens as well? Hopefully it does. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, if you've got a support scheme in place, if you've got a planning regime that allows you to build, and you've got anticipatory investment in the grid, I would be extremely confident that investors will come forward.
I'd have to agree with that. The anticipatory investment is a critical factor here in terms of being able to prepare for the future. Not just what we think that we need now. I think we vastly underestimate the potential role of electricity moving forward within Northern Ireland, and we are designing a grid which can only handle a fraction of what it probably needs in the future. So the anticipatory investment actually needs to operate at a scale probably beyond what our current thinking is. And departments such as DFE, etc., will need to be prepared for that. But in terms of the overall net zero journey for Northern Ireland, it will need to link in with many other of the departments at the Assembly in order to be able to drive forward the overall trajectory and to allow us to get to net zero within the timeframes.
Thank you very much. Lee Tolhurst.
Thank you, and welcome. So we've heard about the different merits of the different renewable energy, the energies and technologies. Could you set out which technologies will be most important in helping Northern Ireland reach its net zero targets?
Well, there will be a range of different technologies which need to be applied here. In part, it's worth maybe reflecting on the overall energy mix within Northern Ireland and where that is sort of goes. A lot of the focus here is being on electricity. Electricity is only about 14% of our grid at the moment. Northern Ireland uses approximately 1 billion units of energy a week. All of the renewable capacity in Northern Ireland at the minute would not even last 1 month. And so even with the expansion of the grid to go out to 80%, we only get about 6 weeks worth of energy. So there's a lot that needs to happen in the future in order to be able to help decarbonise. You will get efficiency savings by switching to EVs, and you will get efficiency savings from switching to heat pumps. But even there, we will still need a whole range of different technologies to come in to be able to either to meet that using electricity or to meet it using other types of low carbon fuels, as being pointed out elsewhere in the conversations today and elsewhere. So all of that needs to come to play. The CCC have also provided additional advice reports on the rollout of that over the next decades in order to be able to help to achieve the 2050 target.
So I would say electricity is going to be key to this, and that's partly because electricity is relatively straightforward to decarbonise, 100% decarbonise. But it's also because electricity is so much more efficient than the things it displaces. So an electric vehicle is 3 times more efficient than a petrol vehicle. A heat pump is 3 times more efficient than a fossil boiler. So when you hear all these figures about different amounts of electricity, how much goes into households and so on, you have to remember that if you replace it with electricity, you're cutting it by 1/3.
Yeah.
So yes, you need a lot more electricity, perhaps double, but you don't need to replace all of that energy that is going into homes and businesses at the moment, because those fossil processes are so inefficient. And so electricity is the key technology. To deliver that, it's mostly going to be wind in Northern Ireland because you have such fantastic wind resources. But solar will be useful because solar is a good complement to wind. It tends to be either windy or sunny. And therefore it helps at times when it's less windy. You've heard a lot about interconnectors as very valuable, connecting both to the Republic and to the UK, but also the Republic itself, I think, is connecting to France. France is in a different time zone. That's very helpful for managing electricity demand.
And storage, you'll need both short-term storage, things like batteries, that can get you through the fact that demand is much higher in the evening than it is in the middle of the night. Flexibility in when you charge things like electric vehicles is also a way of managing demand. But longer-term storage for, well, what happens if it's not windy for several days in a row? And that probably will be, as you heard earlier, in Northern Ireland hydrogen. In Great Britain, there'll be a role probably for gas with carbon capture and storage, but carbon capture and storage is harder in Northern Ireland because you don't have such good access to stores. The process of round-tripping surplus electricity into hydrogen and back again into electricity is quite inefficient. There are big losses in all of those stages. So you don't want to do this routinely. But because hydrogen is storable, it is a good solution for that long periods where you need a lot of energy for days, perhaps even a week or more, where it's calm, and it may be calm across Great Britain as well. So it will be part of the mix to solve that bit of the problem. And then lots of heat pumps and lots of electric vehicles.
Right. I actually represent a constituency which we have a place called Energy Island, because we've got interconnectors, power stations, hydrogen. So it's really interesting to hear from you about sort of that wider mix and plan. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we've done some work which demonstrates that the Energy Island type concept would work exceptionally well across regions of Northern Ireland. So your colleague sitting beside you, areas around Craigavon would fit extremely well in terms of an Energy Island concept to support not only industry but hospitals and schools and leisure centres within that specific jurisdiction. Yeah.
Oops.
Thank you very much indeed. Robert Goodwill.
Thank you. We've heard that you're very enthusiastic about heat pumps and how much more efficient they are. But we heard in the first session that it could maybe take 20 years or so to actually get the grid capacity up to that level. I'm wondering also how long is it going to take to get the housing stock in Northern Ireland sufficiently well insulated to make heat pumps viable? I mean, are they the two challenges that really we need to address before heat pumps could become much more attractive to homeowners?
The thermodynamics of heat pumps are very difficult to beat. The only thing that tends to beat thermodynamics is economics in the real world, and hence the economics of putting in systems is very expensive at the minute and has been, again, touched on by previous speakers. It will take time, and a long time, to get the retrofit programs in place in order to be able to make heat pumps cost effective to most consumers. But in terms of energy efficiency and what that will do towards net zero, they are the best solution. But it will take time, and it will take a longer rollout for that, and there are intermediate technologies that can be put in place. Examples within Northern Ireland that could be installed quicker would be around, for instance, hybrid-based heat pump systems, which can top up essentially the heat within the network using gas. Has a much lower retrofit. The efficiencies are less, but they are better than simply gas, and could be deployed alongside solutions such as biogas within Northern Ireland in order to be able to make a significant impact in terms of the carbon emissions.
Thank you. We also heard in the first session that sort of it almost sounded like low-hanging fruit, that hydro-treated vegetable oil could very quickly be deployed at maybe 20% inclusion in domestic heating oil, which has a much higher proportion of users than maybe in the rest of England, certainly. Would that be something you would favour, or would that just put off what we really need to do, which is install heat pumps?
Well, there's a time delay in terms of people who have just installed oil boilers will need solutions for the next 15 years as those pieces of technology run their natural course. There is a danger with ripping out old technology and putting in new technology. You don't really see the savings. So there is a role for HVO and versions of low carbon fuels from the short to medium term within Northern Ireland. Longer term, the analysis would sort of indicate that some of those fuels would be more likely directed towards areas such as aviation. And so there probably will need to be solutions longer term in order to be able to then get those homes off kerosene and onto lower carbon fuels as a result.
Yeah. Can I add something to this as well? Because I think some of the numbers that were being put forward were perhaps a little bit disingenuous. I think it is important to recognize HVO is roughly twice the price of heating oil.
Whereas a heat pump, because it's so much more efficient, particularly in an electricity system that's heavily renewable and will therefore be cheaper than today's very high prices, will cost a lot less to run. So if it costs about £1,500, which is the industry figure, to run off heating oil, it will cost about £3,000 to run off HVO, 100% HVO. And it would cost maybe £1,000 to run a heat pump in that property. And a heat pump doesn't cost £24,000. Boiler upgrade scheme, which is running in England, the average cost of £13,000. Half of those installs are going into rural areas. 20% of them are replacing oil boilers, even in England, which has a much, much lower rate of oil boilers. And increasingly what we're seeing is a move towards higher temperature heat pumps, which is just a slight change to the technology, which is actually being driven by more regulatory changes. But it makes them much more of a drop-in replacement, even in buildings that don't have particularly good energy efficiency. So there's energy efficiency investments are good because they save people money, they save carbon, but they are much less necessary for the next generation of heat pumps that are coming through than a lot of what people are saying, and it includes heat pumps being manufactured in Northern Ireland by Octopus. They simply operate at a higher water temperature, so they are much more substitutable for the existing way the house works and with the thing. So, you're looking at a cost of maybe £13,000 roughly to put a heat pump into a building. A new oil boiler might be £3,000 to £5,000. You're saving about £2,000 a year on the running costs. So the economics of heat pumps are much, much better. But there is also a problem, in a sense, with using biofuels, particularly in Northern Ireland, is that they simply don't get you to net zero. They're not themselves net zero, whereas electricity can be. So they don't get heating to zero. But also because Northern Ireland has this very large agricultural sector, which means you can't get methane emissions down to zero. You have to have offsets to get Northern Ireland to net zero 2050.
Is it not the case with methane, though, you only need to reduce it to be less than 20 years ago, so that as it's dissipated, then you actually aren't net zero? Is that
but right now, the more we can do on methane, because right now is when we need to take action on the climate. Yeah. So we need to offset those residual methane emissions that will continue to come from Northern Ireland's large agricultural sector. Mm-hmm. The most cost-effective way of doing that will be on land by growing trees and so on, but is to use the biofuels that you have, things like biomethane, with carbon capture and storage. That's difficult in Northern Ireland because you'll probably have to ship the carbon to be stored elsewhere. But the alternative to that is direct air capture, which is more expensive. So you really want to concentrate the use of biofuels within Northern Ireland on biofuels with carbon capture and storage. There may be some exceptions where you've got, on-farm AD and it's just too difficult to get the fuel out of the farm if it's remote, and you might have combined heat and power on farm, but mostly you want to try and concentrate those resources so that they can provide the offsets to the methane at the most cost effective.
Right. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Carla Lockhart.
Thank you, Chair, and you called me a lot better than what apologies, my technology's let me down. Just in relation to, it was actually a very similar question to what I asked the last panel around the UK involvement, the UK government's involvement, and the need for what do you feel the UK government could do to further help the situation in Northern Ireland, and are there specific schemes that you would have witnessed in GB here that would be of benefit to Northern Ireland? So, if we could lift them and replicate them in Northern Ireland, are there specific schemes that you think would be of benefit?
I think you would certainly want to look at the contract for different scheme for renewable generation. Would you lift it exactly the same? I mean, obviously there are issues, and some of those came up earlier about the fact that Northern Ireland is much smaller, and therefore, some things are not going to work exactly the same. But, it's a well-established scheme. The scheme in the Republic is also relatively similar. Developers are used to it. And so, you don't need to change lots of things to get that scheme going. And of course, the more familiar the scheme is to developers, whether that's those operating in the GB market or the Republic market, the quicker it is going to be to get things done, the fewer lawyers you will need. So, broadly speaking, that scheme is very successful. I think also on heat, it is worth looking at both the scheme in England, but also in Scotland, where they've got very ambitious proposals on heat. They're still proposals at this stage, but they're very interesting, which does involve subsidies for those upfront costs of heat pumps, because lots of households obviously will find that very difficult to pay that upfront cost. In Scotland, there is also low-cost finance for the part that does sit with households. And then what is particularly important in England, and will be important for gas customers, but much less so for heating oil customers in Northern Ireland, is looking at the relative costs of electricity and gas in England. Electricity is expensive because we've added a series of costs to it. If you can rebalance those, you heard earlier about carbon pricing, then that tips the incentives so that people doing the low carbon choice get the better thing. It's not really an issue with heating oil, because heating oil is so much more expensive when you're not in the kind of current Ukraine influenced market, and that's almost certainly why we are seeing a lot of people shifting off heating oil in England onto heat pumps. So there's a series of things that are being done there that are helping take up. And there are, of course, there's other countries that are also being very successful heating. Heat pumps are taking off very strongly in countries like France and Poland.
David, have you?
Yeah, it's similar. I mean, CFD schemes work extremely well for electricity, but again, I'll just remind you, electricity is only 14% of our overall energy demand, so we do need to be looking at other schemes as well. There are things now starting to come through in England, etc., around gas and biogas, but again, I think we have to just recognise all of the other added value that potentially then would come alongside, working alongside agriculture, in order to be able to then utilise it to generate energy in support of the wider ambition, plus all of the caveats that have been mentioned already. So what are the additional values that come from nutrient management, energy services, carbon services? All of those potentially change how you might work with a scheme to add value to biogas in the future. So if it's simple in one sense, like electricity, then CFDs for electricity work very well. But when you start to move into other areas, then the economics can be a little bit more complex.
And would you say in Northern Ireland there are any sort of very forward-thinking schemes? I'm thinking specifically probably of the one down at Granville with the industrial units there. Do you feel that better support for initiatives like that would be helpful? Do you believe there's learning from that, and actually other areas like my own and Craigavon could pick up and use some of the learning from that particular scheme? Absolutely.
I mean, that scheme has learned from other activities gone throughout Europe and in England where gas injection onto the grid occurs. Dungannon was the first place to do that gas grid injection in Northern Ireland and has been successful in doing so. We would like to be in a position to be able to take that type of idea and then to combine it up with, say, Energy Island type linking district heating networks, energy transition or transmission between different users. So the current Seago area is an example of where you've got bakeries, chemical factories, manufacturing, but you've also got hospitals and schools and leisure centres. These types of systems would not in fact be incentivised under a CFD scheme, and so how would you move to incentivise projects where the carbon savings are in fact shared over multiple users, including the private and public sector?
And just very finally, in relation then to the agriculture industry in Northern Ireland, and you referenced it earlier, obviously there is quite an intense focus on agriculture, and actually agriculture I think are doing exceptionally well with regards to giving back and trying to make strides. How can we ensure that we don't get ahead of the industry and actually penalise the industry unnecessarily whenever they are making every effort to advance their give back on these particular issues?
Personally, I think the agricultural industry in Northern Ireland has probably the strongest hand to play essentially in the decarbonisation agenda. They have the ability to effectively farm carbon from the atmosphere. At the minute it is done in a way which is still wasteful. Don't get me wrong, that they are producing lots of methane emissions and it is contributing to the overall emissions profile of the region. But they also have the power to basically completely reverse that. And I think there would be ways whereby we could work proactively with the sector in order to be able to make very strategic interventions, which would actually then deliver real value to the economy. We've already heard about carbon capture being an issue for Northern Ireland. It is. We do not have the ability to store and sequester CO2. We would have to offshore that for injection into subsea aquifers off Scotland, and that would be costly. But we also then have the ability to serve, for instance, an e-fuel hub for parts of the UK, whereby we would utilise that CO2 as a hydrogen storage vector for marine type fuels or for sustainable fuels as part of an overall UK ambition. So there may well be opportunities within Northern Ireland to, in fact, align new types of industry alongside agriculture in order to be able to serve the best interests of the UK and Ireland as a whole.
Yeah, but there has to be a recognition, that the agriculture industry has made huge strides, and it's important that they are not the sole focus of endeavouring to get to the end point, because personally, I think our farmers in Northern Ireland have been very proactive and very to the fore in improving the situation, but I think we've got to recognise that we can't get ahead of them in the demands and unduly demanding things of them that actually is not achievable.
So you're right, we have done some work with the community to understand what carbon cooperatives could look like in terms of how do you work with that sector in order to be able to then maximise carbon sequestration, taking the ideas that have been very successfully applied throughout Northern Ireland, including dairy cooperatives, and applying that into new types of industry and trying to envision what that would look like under the climate change agenda within Northern Ireland, giving more power and control to farmers, etc., in terms of being able to make positive decisions which actually help to get us there. But there are issues, and these have been pointed out by the CCC. It does need to be done right, but I think, as from a joined up approach across the islands, we actually do have an opportunity to completely reverse the problems.
Thank you. And then I wanted to ask you about grid capacity, limited grid capacity, which is an issue both in Northern Ireland and in GB as well. Companies wanting to develop, wanting to bring on new projects, being told you can't connect for years. It's one facet of it. How do you think, what's the importance of it, do you think, in terms of the Northern Ireland context and achieving the net zero goals, and what, the limitations clearly are going to be a challenge, aren't they?
I think it's a key issue in Northern Ireland, but also in GB. We are going to use electricity to displace most other sources of energy, and that requires a grid. And mostly it's going to require upgrading the grid. There are certainly things that you can do that mean that you don't have to upgrade the grid by as much as you're upgrading the use of electricity, by putting more flexibility into the system, so shifting demand out of the peaks, because you have to build these grids for the peak. And that's typically in the evening. You can shift demand, things like electric vehicle charging. Actually, heat pumps are pretty flexible about when you can put demand. And all of those things help, and you can, co-locate, you've already heard about that, demand and supply and storage and so on. So there are things that you can do, but none of those things get away from the fact that you need a big upgrade to the grid, both in Northern Ireland and in GB, and that is the transmission grid, but it is also the distribution grid. And you need that for electric vehicles, actually, regardless of all the debate about heat pumps. And mostly these are they're big fixed cost projects, particularly on the distribution network. If I'm going to dig up the street to put a cable in, the cost is in digging up the street, it's not in the cable. So I might as well put a much bigger cable in. It doesn't cost a lot more to put a big cable in than it does to put a small cable in. The cost is in the civil engineering. And I think, a lot of the challenges there are these challenges about getting anticipatory investment in. So you can do this in a well-ordered, planned way. It's not that we don't know how to build this stuff. We've been building electricity grids for 100 years. But if you try and do it all at once, you'll find it hard to get electricians. You can't dig all the streets up at once, etc. So you need to start as soon as possible, have a well-planned approach, get that investment in, because then you can, you're probably catching up with the demand.
but you ought to be able to keep pace with the rise in demand for electricity. But if you wait, you're then trying to run uphill.
I agree. Large-scale investment in the main infrastructure carrier or energy carriers in the future, which is electricity, needs to happen, and needs to happen as soon as possible. You've heard about interconnection, that's one aspect of it, but it does need to coincide with changes in the region in order to be able to allow for additional capacity to come on. The analogy partly is like trying to build a shopping centre on somebody else's jurisdiction on the edge of a town. That will boost, consumer confidence. It will provide them with additional things, but also runs the risk of essentially running down renewables generated, for instance, within Northern Ireland. We need to do both if we are to, in fact, expand to the level that we need to expand at in order to be able to hit the targets.
Very much.
Thank you very much. I'll maybe just pick up on that about the interconnection, and I suppose how significant hybrid distributed generation will be in terms of maintaining our energy security and targets.
Yeah, so I think, as with all of these things, the mix of technologies does improve the efficiency and it improves the security of supply. So you do want, you want a mix of grid, you want localized storage, you want flexibility, you want interconnectors, because these things all have slightly different characteristics, and therefore you can get a lower cost, more secure system if you use a mix of those different things. So even though the bulk of generation will inevitably come from wind, having local storage, hydrogen, batteries, interconnectors, all of these things bring down the total cost and make it easier to balance the system.
Yeah, same interconnection will allow for the major kind of infrastructure highways to essentially to go between regions. It's like the A6 or the M1 or Larkin Port. It's that type of thing is what we need in order to be able to allow that to happen. But we also need more of the energy island type concepts dotted around the region to look at the maximising the energy efficiency within those regions and allowing them then to be connected through a backbone, which then gives stability across the entire region of Northern Ireland and beyond.
And what state are we in that regard at the moment?
We're not in a very good state. We have lots of small bits of power on people's houses and wind turbines. It's a weaker grid across, particularly west of the Ban, and there's a lot of work to do in order to be able to then provide resilience to the overall network. I know NIE have the plans to do so. They have the investment and are making that investment call to boost that grid. We just want to make sure that it happens in a balanced way, which allows for various different concepts to come through and give long-term resilience and security.
Okay, from that wider, then I wanted to come back on to wind specifically, and I'd been asking before about how reliant we are on wind, and any comments you have on what that poses for our ability to maintain energy security during that transition.
Well, it's been pointed out before, wind is still the primary renewable energy in Northern Ireland, and 85% of it comes from that. In part, you kind of go back, and simple calculations would be if you take the installed wind, multiply it by 2, you'll get the number of weeks that Northern Ireland could run on it. And so if we're talking about 1 gigawatt of offshore wind, that's equivalent to 2 weeks worth of energy in Northern Ireland. We need a lot more, and the only way that we can get a lot more is either to put more in or to take on additional technologies such as EVs and heat pumps, where we get an automatic multiplier effect by 3.
Do you agree with that assessment that the offshore just isn't going to be, whether we like it or not, a factor between now and 2030?
It's unlikely to be delivered by 2030 at this stage.
Could it be if we got the finger out?
We probably could do it if we got the finger out, but I would also argue that places like Scotland as well have put more installed renewables in 1 year than we've had in the last 20. So other places are doing it at pace. I think our ambition is quite low in terms of what we could do. If we want to do it, we should probably be aiming higher, making sure that the anticipatory investments that could go along the backbone of that, utilise that in effective ways, would lead to much better outcomes for the overall economy.
Is it a fair assessment, and I could be off mark here, but that we're really going to struggle to hit our 2030 targets, but that we could do it with offshore if we got the finger out?
We could do it offshore if we got the finger out.
Okay. Just briefly, in the previous discussion, we touched on the decision on cap and floor, the Ofgem decision. What are your thoughts on that?
Or do you?
Yeah, it's not one that I've specifically come across, but I think clearly there is as with all of these interconnectors, you've got two parties, but in this case, you've got two parties that are, both part of the United Kingdom. So there's clearly a case for, the regulators engaging with one another. I'm a little surprised if they're not, but there may be benefits to be had there, because the more, obviously each one has to have its business case. But the more widely interconnected markets are, the easier it is to get the full value out of any asset on that market.
Anything on that, Professor?
It's not an area that
okay. Grand. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Just coming back, developing on the theme of government support, financial incentives. How much do you think a government-backed investment support scheme is going to be an essential prerequisite for Northern Ireland achieving net zero? And if you do think that, what would best practice look like in terms of developing a government-backed scheme that's actually going to work?
I think it's not a single scheme, I would say, because you have different parts of this transition where the economics look very different. So within, electricity generation, transmission, distribution, there's no reason for the government to be subsidising those, because the low-carbon technologies are easily cost-competitive, particularly with today's very high gas prices. But as you've heard, you do need government intervention to ensure the market is structured in a way that developers can have the certainty to get their money back. So that's one type of government intervention, but it doesn't have an implication for the overall budget of the Northern Ireland Executive. Electric vehicles, again, you might want to do things to kickstart bits of the market in the short term, but fundamentally this is going to be a much cheaper technology than a petrol car. It's going to be cheaper to buy pretty soon. It's already a lot cheaper to run. It's cheaper to maintain. Again, you might want some support for charging infrastructure, particularly in rural areas where you don't have the density of consumers. In urban areas, it's probably already, if you can get the demand for the cars in, the chargers are almost certainly cost effective, but you want them everywhere, and that helps build confidence. So that would be quite a targeted thing. But on heat, because of these big upfront costs of heat pumps, you probably do want to be looking at something, a bit like the boiler upgrade scheme or the Scottish scheme, which is quite similar, that does provide direct support to household. You might also want to look at something, in England we have this market mechanism which says, manufacturers have to be shifting towards manufacturing heat pumps. That is trying to shift the industry, as it were, into the new technologies, because that's where the jobs of the future are in. And you want to be getting these industries to be shifting into it. But that, helps accelerate the process of bringing down the cost of the new technology. So I think you need a range of different things. You'll obviously need, it's not my expert area, but you'll need support for agriculture. It's obviously a huge issue. You may need some targeted support for particular industries. So I think it's a range of different interventions.
Yeah.
I agree. There's a range of different things that should happen. From Westminster and also at regional level. I think in part it's useful to kind of reflect, in fact, that baseline targets for the climate have been set in 1990. Northern Ireland is a very different position now than it was in 1990. Energy consumption has in fact increased, by 20-odd% relative to a decrease across the UK of about 20-odd%. And that's just the nature of what happens when you come out post Good Friday Agreement, etc. So that does need to be considered. Plus then with what the implications were about transport, what it was around the fact that our gas grid was not as developed. These have all led to long-term issues that we do need to rapidly catch up on. So we will need help as we accelerate to meet the overall net zero target that the UK has set, as well as ourselves. So that recognition of where Northern Ireland is relative to where the journey for the net zero started does need to be considered, and we will need support.
Mm-hmm. Claire, do you want to come back in on mutualisation?
Yeah, just we were talking before about mutualisation in the previous discussion. What's your assessment of that recommendation to explore and utilise mutualisation of these, the points that were made by Paddy about the ripeness of, I suppose, long-term stable infrastructure type investments?
My view on it would be that there's a lot of opportunities within Northern Ireland that are probably untapped in terms of additional mutualisation options, particularly in lower risk technologies and their deployment, which could provide services. So, and in that capacity, it's how do we work with public estate like NI Water, the Education Authority, the NHS, etc., in order to be able to access parts of their state in order to be able to create energy projects which then could be mutualised for the benefit of the region. I think there's a lot of opportunity that we could take forward with a lot of that infrastructure that is there already that could be monetised in a way that actually delivers also carbon savings for consumers.
Any thoughts on
So
that?
I don't have a particular view on, as it were, the right mix. I think the question I would say is, like, you do have to raise a lot of finance, so you need business models that are capable of mobilising finance, and that would be the question to ask of any business model in this position.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Thank you very much, Chair.
thank you so much to you and the previous panel for giving us very succinct and comprehensive answers in the same breath. We're really grateful to you. We'll continue with another session next week. But in the meantime, can I thank you for attending? We're most grateful to you all. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.